It is now time for the 37th Professor K.K. Nair Commemoration Lecture. I now request Professor S.P. Arun Garu to kindly deliver his lecture on the topic, if we can make AI create art and poetry, why can't we make it see?
Talk to her because you do not understand your speech. You still have to type into a computer to reliably enter speech into the computer. We can't tidy up our rooms or clean dishes or wash laundry with robots because they can't do it still. And you can't even make them see. And one of the proofs that you actually can, robots cannot see is that even now all of you would have been entering some kind of distorted letters on websites, especially if you have to do something important on the internet. You have to enter you have to recognize those letters. And that actually shows you that computers are still not able to recognize even simple letters. It's not alone if I want to look at a big audience like this, I want to recognize what I'm looking at. That's a very hard problem. Okay, so those are all the problems. In fact, this problem has not only been noticed, it's not just me talking about this problem, but back in the 1980s, there was a big revolution of neural networks. And at that time, somebody called Moravec actually pointed out this particular paradox. Basically, what he said is, whatever we find hard will be the easy stuff for a computer to do. So, for example, if you want to multiply two 8-digit numbers or take the square root of 2, then the computer can do it really fast, right? Even chess. For example, if you want to play chess, it's a hard activity for all of us. Computers are able to play chess. So now, if you think about it, for example, creating some art is actually very difficult activity for us. Again, very easy for a computer. In fact, what Moravec actually talked about back in the 1980s is that the exact set of things that you do without thinking are exactly the things that are hard for computers to do. So whatever we find easy to do is exactly the problems that are actually hard for computers. And that by and large remains true today. So even the simple acts of seeing, hearing, moving, for a robot to actually pick up an egg is a very, very delicate task because you have to sense the pressure of the object, and if the robot actually applies too much force, the egg will crush. If the robot applies too little force, the egg will drop. And so this is a very, very delicate task for a robot, and those kinds of tasks are exactly where robots are actually failing us today. They are not failing us on discussing things with us. You can discuss a number of things with ChatGPT. There's no problem. It's actually the things that we do without thinking that are actually the hard problems. You might be thinking, well, how come it's a hard problem? I'm doing it without thinking, right? The problem is, the reason is that the brain has been optimized over the course of evolution to solve these problems. So insects have solved the problem of seeing, flying. All animals have solved the problem of looking around, recognizing sounds, navigating their environment. So these are very, very old evolutionary, sort of inheritances that we have, and because of which we are able to solve all these problems of sensory information processing. And that's actually the hard problem that evolution has solved for us. We are not solving it. We don't know how much is solved and how much we are learning with experience. But there's a mix of the two. But we don't know exactly how we are able to solve this. Because if I ask you, how is it that you see? You can't tell me the answer, right? And I'll give you actually even more concrete example as we go. So I'll continue with this. This is all from 80s stuff. Those of you who are interested in AI should actually look up all the hype about AI in the 1980s. And there was a huge amount of hype about AI, just exactly like we're going through today, where people thought that AI will solve all the world's problems, bring world peace, shave your beard, everything, right? But even now again, the same kind of hype is going on. Right? People think that there's a lot of excitement about AI. If the excitement is based on some real facts, but still there is a lot of hype as well. So this guy, Douglas Hofstadter, wrote this very interesting book called Metamagical Themas. And those of you who are interested can go look it up. In that book, he actually talks about the hard problems of AI. And basically what he said is there are two hard problems of AI. The two hard problems are, what is A and what is I? Okay? Now, we are in India, a land where the concept of I has been thoroughly investigated. And we know that there is no I because there is no self, right? So there's nothing to investigate on where is I. All we have to understand is what is A. Now, what do you mean by this problem, right? So if you look at this picture, the picture actually shows you a number of different ways of writing the letter A. Now, many of you have never been shown this particular manifestation of the letter A, but the moment you look at the letter A, you recognize that this is a letter A. Imagine if you saw only one of these pictures, you'll immediately say, yeah, this letter A. So even though you've given only few examples, in fact your parents or your teachers probably showed you a couple of written examples of letter A and said this is A, this is A. They didn't give you a million examples like you're giving the current computer algorithms today. Today if you want to train a computer algorithm to detect what is a car, you have to show millions of car images. If you want to recognize what's an A, you have to show millions and millions of A images. Still there are captchas in the websites where you cannot recognize a new letter A in a different font. Or if you say handwritten letter A, again AI is not able to do it. So what's happening here is that the problem of understanding the letter A has been solved by us. When I give you a couple of simple examples of the letter A, you're able to understand the idea of A, right? And you're able to apply that idea of A to any new appearance of the letter A. And somehow we are able to do this, and somehow computers are not able to do it. Okay, so question is what's happening? How come computers are are not able to do this problem? Let me give you another example. Here's a picture of a scene. Immediately, if I ask you to describe what's in the scene, you will say, okay, there's a farmer, there's a scene, there's a farmer, there's some grass he's holding a hut, and you are able to give a very compact description of the scene. Okay, and what I would say is that for a computer to do the same task, it has to understand that there are actually objects in the image. Right now, when a computer looks at an image, it's getting a bunch of pixels. You're getting just pixel values in 3 color channels, and you're getting a pixel value at every place. How does the computer actually understand that there's an object in there? How do you even know that there's an object? These are actually the profound questions. In fact, we don't know how we are able to know it. And part of our puzzle is to figure out where in the brain do you get this kind of description that you are able to very easily access it and talk about it, right? So that's the sort of question. And if you look inside the brain, all of us think that when you look, the eyes are what you see with and that's it, right? But actually, the eyes are only the beginning of the processing pathway of vision. And if you look in the brain, this is actually the monkey brain. In the monkey brain and actually even in our brain as well. What is pictured over here, and the reason I'm showing the monkey brain is because the monkey brain has been very, very extensively investigated and the brain is very similar to ours. So we can label all the brain regions and actually know the connectivity of all the brain regions in the brain. To do that in a human being will require somebody like you need to poke around with an electrode in the human being, and it's not easy. Okay, so we can do this in an animal experiment much easier. So what is being shown here is all the regions in the monkey brain which are involved in vision. So what this tells you is that if you count the amount of brain area that is dedicated for vision, you will see that almost 40 to 50% of your brain is dedicated to processing visual information. That shows you that vision is actually not an easy problem for the brain as well, because the brain is spending a lot of real estate trying to solve that problem. And part of the challenge is that we don't know exactly what the brain is doing with all the information and what is all the sequence of processing going on. So if you imagine all of you are basically trained in electrical engineering, so then you think of it as signal processing, right? You're doing some image processing. The brain is also doing some image processing, and actually it's spending half of it, of the brain area, in just doing signal processing of the image that is coming from the eyes. So it shows you that the brain also considers vision to be a hard problem and it's trying to solve it. And if you record from different parts of the visual pathway, you will find that there is a location in the visual pathway where the brain has solved the problem of vision. And so I will show you actually some example recordings that we've done in our lab for this thing. Okay? So this is the main sort of theme I want to bring up. We'd like to have a conversation with AI. I'm a neuroscientist. At some point in my career, I thought, okay, I have to study either AI or I have to study real brains and how they actually work. And in the case of robots, you have to invent something that doesn't really work right now. You want to fix what doesn't work and you want to make it work. In the case of brains, you want to understand what's already working. It's sort of like reverse engineering. So you want to understand what the brain is doing. If we understand it properly, we can implement it to a robot and immediately make it see, make it hear, make it speak, make it walk around and use. So how do we do it? Well, one is you can potentially understand the brain by using AI, because AI is actually AI algorithms, for example, for vision have progressed a lot. So I'll tell you one example. If you take a photograph and you ask the computer what is in the photograph, for For example, if I take a photograph of this room and say, I want a description like, okay, there's a scene here, there's a bunch of seats, there's a bunch of people sitting and so on. I want a nice description of what I'm looking at, right? So AI back in the 2015 or 2010 era was actually 30% correct, which means that if you want to correctly label all the objects in the scene, it was only getting 30% right. Today, AI is getting 70% right. So obviously, if a student has gone from 30% correct, which is like fail, I'm guessing, to like 70% correct, which is like decent marks, you can pass and like live a life. So yeah, I mean, AI is doing much better. When somebody who's gone from 30% to 70% should be, celebrated. So it is good that we are celebrating AI. But remember, human beings are at 100%. This is like the topper in the class, and actually every human being is a topper in this class, right? We are all toppers, and they're actually at 100%. And the few failures that we actually have in terms of recognizing visual objects is actually just because we are tired of doing the task. But otherwise, if you take a human being who is able to do visual tasks, they're actually 100%. So what I would say as a neuroscientist is that, okay, AI is getting better, that's nice, but we're still at 100%. And there's a big gap between how humans are able to see and how AI or computer algorithms are able to see. So, but nonetheless, that 30 to 70% improvement is nice to understand, because we want to know exactly why is it that they're able to do so much better. And then if we know what makes them better, and then we know what's the difference between the brain and AI, we can actually potentially improve AI. So that's the second part of it. So we can either understand the brain using AI, because AI is doing something right, because if it's getting better and better, obviously it's doing something right. So we want to understand what is it doing right. Second side of it is, maybe if we understand how the brain is different, and we see exactly where the brain is different, we can make AI actually even better. And so that's another part of it. Right? So this is just our the logo of our lab, and we do 3 kinds of experiments in our lab to understand how vision works in the brain. And so for the rest of the time, I'm just going to talk about how vision works in the brain, not too much about AI, but you'll see AI is sort of in the background, in the picture somewhere over here. Okay? So first type of experiment is we do experiments on human participants. So what that means is we'll bring people into the lab, we'll put an advertisement in the campus or in the email distribution network, and we say, okay, we are looking for volunteers to participate in our experiments. In the experiment, we make you do a task, which is a visual task, and then based on your responses in the task, we'll actually try to figure out what is it that you're doing inside your brain. Okay, just by looking at the responses. That's one type of experiment. Another kind of experiment is MRI. So we can actually do brain imaging, and we can measure the blood flow related changes in your brain, and we can understand what's going on there. More recently, we're looking at some experiments where we're looking at how children are learning to read. I'll say a little bit more about that. Another category of experiments is actually looking at animal brains. And the idea here is that just like if you take a complex system that you see like an integrated circuit or a chip, you like to understand the internal details. And so we want to understand the internal details of the visual processing part. And so to understand the internal details, we need to actually record inside the brain of animals. And when you do recordings inside the brain, you can actually understand the circuitry inside. I'll give you examples of that as well. And a third category is computational modeling. So we actually build models of the data. Brain data, lots of brain data that we have. We also have computational models. We also use AI algorithms as well. And we try to see whether we can explain brain data using AI and so on and so forth. So that's the overall So you might be thinking, and constant criticism of professors is that we always do things which are not related to the real world. And what I would say is that although we are not directly working on the real world, we do want to contribute in terms of a deeper understanding of the brain. And usually the history of science shows that whenever you deeply understand something, there are lots of practical applications. So although if you directly go to practical applications, of course you are using the existing knowledge. But our job as a scientist is to create new knowledge. And then if you create new knowledge, then of course that knowledge will have some application later on down the line. So, but nonetheless, we do have a couple of real world implications. So let me tell you some of those. We are running a project. This is a test that you can take right now. Please take a photo of this or whatever and take go to the website, or even just search for Indian Face Perception Project. The purpose of the project, and I can tell you more offline if somebody is interested, is that the purpose is that all of us have different amounts of face recognition ability. Okay? There are people among us just like color blindness, there's a condition called face blindness, where the face recognition parts of your brain are actually impaired, and therefore you cannot recognize faces. Just like people with color blindness cannot recognize colors, there are people with face blindness who have difficulty recognizing faces. The proportion of people in the Western population which have face blindness is about 2-3%. And Indian population, nobody has any idea because no one has done a test. And so we've created an online test, so you can take it for yourself. If you have and by the way, there's another category of people who are super recognizers. It means that these people never forget a face. It's not about learning the name of a face. Of course, we're all bad with names, naming faces and learning names of people. But just in terms of knowing whether you've seen a person before. And some people are very, very good at that. So you might know a friend, all of us know that friend, they'll say, okay, you know what, in 2002 you did something and I said something, and be like, oh my god, okay, when you said it, then maybe it's true, I'll just agree that you said it, that is that. But there are people like that who are super recognizers. So both ways we want to find people who are actually very deficient in their face processing and people who are very good at their face processing. Okay, so please take this test. If your test score is very, very good or very, very bad, we might get in touch with you. And just because you have a low score doesn't mean that you're face blindness. Just because you have a high score doesn't mean that you're super recognizers. For example, you're just in a bad mood because you fought with your partner or wife or husband, whatever. So you might just get a low score because of that. So we need to actually validate that score by doing some further assessment. So we'll get in touch with you if your score is very, very good or very bad. But the purpose or our goal is to understand the spectrum of face appearance. Okay? Second interesting real world application is that we're partnering with a robotics company, and the robotics company is very interested in building eyes that see like us. So they have stereo vision, the eyes can focus and so on. And they want to they've realized that building a good visual system is critical for making a robot do things in the factory or so we're partnering with them to actually try to build some insights from what we're doing to helping robots see better. Okay. Third sort of real world thing is we've started a major project where we're trying to understand how children are learning to read. Now those of you who have had children and you watch them grow up and start to learn to read, you'll find that there is a particular phase where they're initially learning the shapes of letters, and then within a very matter of few weeks, they transition from reading letter by letter to like the entire word at once. And what is actually happening during that time is that these children, and all of us have this, is that you're forming a completely new brain region in your brain. Okay? A new region is formed, which is specifically responding to the letters of the alphabet that you learn. So for example, I know Telugu and Hindi and English. I have a word form area, it's called the visual word form area, which responds only to Telugu, English and Hindi, the letters that I know. For example, if I see Tamil letters or Malayalam letters, that region in my brain doesn't get activated. Okay? So how this region is forming is because you're demanding the child to learn to read, and in response to the demand, the brain is actually forming a completely new brain region. It's not there if you don't know how to read. It's there if you know how to read. All of you have it because you're reading all this, so you have it. Okay? So we're trying to understand that process better, trying to figure out exactly what's working in the brain. Final part is, there is one scenario in humans where patients go for treatment of epilepsy, that is seizures. So when they go for treatment of epilepsy, if the epilepsy cannot be treated by drugs, then the doctors will recommend a surgery. And the surgery will then involve some monitoring of the brain activity in human patients. So we're trying to actually partner with clinicians to be able to record from the human brain. And then of course the goal is to understand the human brain. It's a golden opportunity to actually access the human brain and get interesting signals from it. And one of the interesting things that we want to study is language. Because most animals don't have very, very complex language. Very few animals have things that they do like us. So language is something that is very, very unique to humans, so we want to understand that better. And so we are hoping to record from the brain of patients while they undergo this treatment to be able to understand that. So those are all the different real world implications. So let me give you like a brief trailer of the rest of the movie. This is just a glimpse of the work that we've done in the area. And I'll talk about a few of those. I don't know how far we can go in some time, but we can cover as much as possible. If anyone wants to ask some questions, you can raise your hand and you don't understand something, or otherwise you can wait till the end and ask. So what have we been doing in this area. And so now you'll see sort of summary of some studies. So for example, we've looked at face recognition in people and compared face recognition in AI algorithms. And we found that AI algorithms have very, very systematically different kind of error patterns. That is, they behave very differently. Humans behave very differently on recognizing faces. So I'll give you some examples of that. We've also compared how similar two objects look to us and how similar two objects look in computer vision algorithms, and again we see very different performance of humans and AI. We've compared perception in machines and humans. I'll talk about that a bit more. And that revealed some interesting differences between how we see and how computer algorithms are seen today. Okay? We've also tried to compare brain-like properties in deep networks, and we found that certain kinds of properties matter more, and those have a bigger effect than changing the data set or training the gene and so on. Okay? Then of course I'll talk about CAPTCHAs, because we've done a study on CAPTCHAs. And finally, I'll talk about this project that we are doing right now, where we're taking brain activity that is recorded from the brain, and we want to reconstruct what is it that you're looking at. So the idea is that we want to reverse the problem of encoding into decode. Okay, so I'll talk about a couple of these projects. Let's see how far we can go. So let me talk about the first one, and this is basically the following sort of idea. This is work done by Harish, who was a postdoc in the lab and at Nair in USA. The question we wanted to ask is, let's actually, so if you look at object recognition in a machine algorithm versus a human, machines are doing 90% correct. By the way, if you want to recognize letters with a computer vision algorithm, you should try it for yourself. All of you are probably familiar with training some network or doing some computer vision kind of project. So try it yourself. If you train a computer vision algorithm to recognize, let's say, the letter A, the performance of that algorithm is going to be 90%, which means that 90% of the time it's correctly telling you what it's A. But the problem is, again, humans are at 100%. And the 90% to 10, that 10% of improvement takes a lot of effort. Okay? So what we decided to do is that if you compare the recognition of letter A between humans and computers, the number of errors that they make is very, very little, right? So then the number of mistakes you can compare is very, very small. So what we decided to do in this particular study is to compare machines and humans on a hard task, where humans are also making some mistakes and computers are also going to make some mistakes. So then if we compare them, because the number of mistakes are going to be large, we can compare the mistakes and the error patterns, and then we can understand something about what's going on inside. Okay, so that was the idea. So we selected a very particular problem, and the problem is this. Okay. Generally speaking, this is North India, this is South India. Sorry to offend somebody from like Gujarat and thought that you're North India. This was sort of our operational definition. I'll tell you why. Okay, so basically, if you look at some face, okay, and let me just introduce the problem to you. If you look at a person when you encounter, when you meet a new person, sometimes you can look at them and say, you know what, this person is definitely from Tamil Nadu. Or this person is, not only you can tell that they are from Tamil Nadu, not only you can tell them they are from Andhra, but you can say that person is from Telangana, that person from East Godavari. That level of recognition we all do it. But if you think about what you're doing, can you tell me what face feature you're using to actually do the task? We can't tell you. If you think about how is it that I'm telling that somebody is from Delhi, or somebody from North India, somebody is Bengali. So we are able to make all these judgments. So question is, what is the face feature that you're using to make that judgment? And most likely, you won't even know what that feature is. Right? If you thought a lot, you might say, okay, South Indians have a certain kind of face and certain kind of lips or mouth or whatever, but it's a hard thing. You've just learned the task. And remember, you've not been taught in your school to do this task, right? You just learned the task because you met enough people. And if you met enough people, you start noticing, okay, all North Indians are looking like this, all these Bengalis look like that, all these Malus look like this. Yeah, we do all these kinds of processing automatically, right? Because we're very fond of creating groups and discriminating against each other, right? So, but our question was not about the discrimination, but we are interested in just, if I look at a face, because if I meet a person, you might be judging based on the accent or the language. And we're not interested in language and speech because we're studying vision. So we have to be pure and study the visual part. So we show a photograph and we say, okay, can you tell that that person is South Indian or North Indian? and somebody says, hey, what is North Indian, what is South Indian, we point to this map and say, you know what, this is what we define as South Indian, North Indian. Okay, this has nothing to do with what everybody thinks is North India, South India. I mean, generally it agrees, but not all. Right? So here are some example faces. So if you look at those faces on the extreme right, these are faces where, these are photos of real people. We ask them where they are from. And we ask them like which part of India they're from. And so we know that they're actually North Indian or actually South Indian. And actually if you ask a bunch of people who don't even know these faces, and if you ask them to categorize and you say, are they from North India, South India? People are very, very accurate on those faces. Those numbers beside the face represent the accuracy of people. So for example, if all of us were told to say whether this is North Indian, South Indian, we'd all say that it's North India, South India. Okay? But we also saw that there are a bunch of, this accuracy or the categorization accuracy varies a lot. That means there are some faces, if you show that face, everybody will say that that person is from North India, although when you ask that person, he's from South India. Okay, similarly other way around. There are some North Indians who look like South Indians. Okay? And we know that there's not like mixed parents or something like that. Their parents are truly from North India, but still somehow their face turned out to be South Indian. So nothing they can do about it. Okay? But our interesting problem was, can we look at how consistently people are able to do this task? And it turns out that people are very, very consistent. And that to me is a very interesting fact, because I have seen a different set of faces. Each of you have seen a different set of faces. Still, when I make you do a particular task of face recognition, your performance is very, very similar. How come our performance is similar despite the training data being very dissimilar? That means we must have learned the same set of features, and the data is also coming from a common distribution. Right? So that's the idea. So then, how do we study this problem? Well, what we did was, we said, okay, now let's take computer vision algorithms. So here's a deep network, and we take the face, pass it through a deep network, extract the features from the deep network, and we train a classifier to label these on the label data to learn this problem. Right? But with a deep network, you don't know what exactly it's doing, because it's taking the full image and we don't know which part of the image it's using. So to understand which part of the face we are actually using for classification, we extracted features in this way. So we manually extracted features from different parts of the face. And so we say, okay, let me take all the features related to the mouth. And then using the mouth, can I classify the face as being North Indian, South Indian? So I can actually make some inferences like that. So this is the final result. There's a lot of different features here. What you can notice here is that humans are not perfect on this task. Humans only do 64%, which is not great. If you take the best performing computer vision algorithm, that turns out to be a deep network, and that deep network performance is 61%. So here, the computer algorithm and the humans are actually kind of similar. Right? But now what is interesting to us is we want to compare the error patterns. That is the faces on which the computers got wrong versus the faces on which humans got wrong. And remember, humans are very consistent with humans. For example, if I divide this room into two halves and I make all of you do this categorization task, the correlation between your error patterns will be almost 80%. It means 0.8 correlation is very, very high. All of us are very consistent. But if you look at that correlation pattern with what a computer algorithm will do, it's very, very low. So this is what we are showing here. The computer algorithms have very systematically different errors. The last bar over there is the consistency of humans with each other. Whereas if you can see all the other algorithms, even if you train these algorithms on doing the task, and actually even if you train them to perform like humans, even then their performance is actually not like humans. What this tells us, or what this tells me as a neuroscientist, is that we are using a very different feature set compared to computer algorithms. They're not using pixels, they're not using deep network features, we are using something else. Because we are using something else, the error patterns are very different. So that's the conclusion of that one part. Until then, I can keep going for hours. So maybe like okay. So let's go to another kind of comparison of AI with humans. Okay. So the other question is, we wanted to understand, do computer algorithms, do they see the way we do? So what do we mean by having a computer see the way we do? Well, I want to show you a kind of difference. Suppose I had a task where the computer performs at some level and humans are a little bit better, just like the face recognition example. Then we are comparing performance, and when you compare performance with computers a little bit less, you think, okay, maybe just trained on some more data. That's the usual thing that AI experts will tell us. If the AI is failing today, they'll say, no, just give more data, more data, more data. They'll just consume the entire internet, get some indigestion, but still not solve the problem, right? But that's the problem with the AI algorithms today, because whatever problems that they have will always be pointed at less data, right? But humans are actually not consuming that amount of data. And so this is what I would say is a quantitative difference. There's another kind of difference, which is what I would say is a qualitative difference. So for example, if you compare machines and brains, suppose the machine does a completely opposite kind of behavior compared to a human being, then we'll say that's a qualitative difference, right? Just like we got those error patterns, the error patterns are completely different. So then we say, okay, machines are doing completely different things. So we wanted to actually find a qualitative difference between machines and AI, okay, machines and humans. So this is work done by these people, Georgian, Harish and Pramod. And here's the way that we actually address this problem. What we said is, let's take some example visual illusions, and this is one example visual illusion, where two faces are shown in the inverted condition. This is called the Thatcher effect, okay? But if I take the same faces and I put them upright, notice what happens, right? So you can see that the two faces are actually very, very different from each other. One face has been distorted very heavily. But when you make those faces inverted, you can't notice a difference, which means that the same face, when you view it in the upright condition, looks very distinct to you. But if you look at it in the inverted condition, looks very similar to each other. So the point here is that if you take this Thatcher effect, the distance between upright faces is actually much bigger than the distance between inverted faces, where you take the same face. And the amount of change you can notice on an upright face is much more than the difference you notice on an inverted face. Okay, so you can test it for yourself. If you manipulate some images, you'll see that inverted faces look very different. Okay, so why am I bringing this up? I'm bringing this up to show that this is actually a qualitative difference, which means that even though the picture is exactly the same, if you invert it, the effect on your perception is very different. Okay, so we can actually test whether deep networks, or for that matter any computer vision algorithms, we can test whether that algorithm actually sees in the same way by looking at the distance inside the algorithm. Okay, so that's what we did here. So we can ask whether do deep networks actually show the Thatcher effect. Basically what we do is we take the feature vector inside the deep network, extract the feature vector, look at the difference between the feature vectors of two upright faces and the inverted versions of the same face. If we find that the distance between upright faces is more than the distance between inverted faces, we'll say that the deep network has a Thatcher effect. Okay, everybody understand the basic idea? So then what we can do actually here, so that's what bottom here. What we can do then is to take the deep network layers, and for every layer I can check whether the Thatcher effect is present or not. Okay, so that's what I'm doing here. Anything above 0 means that it has a Thatcher effect. Anything below 0 means it doesn't have the Thatcher effect. And what we saw is very interesting. This is a deep network that is actually trained for object recognition. Okay? So it's only been trained on objects. It doesn't know what's a face, it doesn't know what's a person, it's just learning about objects. There are 1,000 categories that it's trained on, so it can recognize 1,000 objects. What you see over here is that deep network trained on objects actually does not have a Thatcher effect. In fact, it does the opposite of a Thatcher effect in the last layers of the network. Okay? But if you take a network that is trained on faces, then that face trained network actually has a Thatcher effect. What this shows is that the AI algorithm is very specific what it's trained on. If it's trained on faces, it will show a Thatcher effect. If it's not trained on faces, it won't show a Thatcher effect. Okay? Let me show you an example. This is one case where you can see that AI algorithms are showing a Thatcher effect exactly like we also show a Thatcher effect. So it's a case where humans and machines are doing the same thing. But here's an example where they don't do the same thing. This is a very famous phenomenon in psychology. It's called the global advantage effect. Basically what it refers to is to ask you, what do you see here? Most people will say that they see a circle which is made of squares. Okay? So you see the global shape first and then you see the local shape. This has given rise to the very famous saying that you see the forest before you see the trees. Okay, so that's a very famous sort of summary of that. So what this means is that if you look at, if you do the experiment in a controlled way. If you ask people to report the global shape by pressing a key, or you report the local shape by pressing a key, you will find that people report the global shape very fast, but they report the local shape very slowly. So basically that's the idea. So now what we said is, okay, maybe this means that global shapes are very different in our perception, but local shapes are not very different. So the way we did this was to compare the distance between two shapes which are similar at the local level, like the left, the middle, and the square made of squares, and the circle made of squares. These two shapes differ only in the global level. The last two shapes differ only in the local level. That is, globally there is a circle, but locally there is a square or a circle. So you can compare those two distances, and you can see how sensitive we are to change in the global shape while controlling the local shape, or how sensitive we are to the local shape while controlling the global shape. Okay. So if you now do this experiment now on humans, we know that this works. Humans are more sensitive to the global shape. But if you look at actually what happens in a deep network, this is what you get. Okay, so anything above zero is human perception, but deep networks actually show a completely opposite effect, which is that they are very sensitive to the local shape. Okay, and this is given rise to this idea that in deep networks, I don't know how many of you played around with deep networks, but if you change very small feature in a deep network, it will completely give you the completely opposite answer. And they're very, very sensitive to local details. And whereas humans are not sensitive. So if you change a small part of the image, you won't change your response. But deep networks will change the response. Okay, so that's a huge problem with AI algorithms today. And nowadays, the AI hype is such that it's being deployed everywhere. And if you actually go down to look at the errors in the AI algorithms, what they're actually finding, the errors are completely different from what humans are doing, at least for the case of vision. I can only talk about vision because I study vision. But I can tell you that at least in domains like this, the errors are very, very different from what humans are doing. Okay? You can try for yourself for the speech recognition in your phone. If you do speech to text, you'll see that lots of times there are errors. It's not like they're doing badly. It's a 90% correct, but still that 90% is different from 100% correct. There's a big difference. So what we did is in this particular study is that we compared a bunch of properties like this. And so we got a bunch of yes-no answers. Basically we said, okay, is this effect present in humans? Yes, no. And then if we find the effect, we say yes. If you don't find the effect, we say no. And turns out that there's a bunch of cases where AI algorithms are actually not seeing the way we do. And so the idea is that if we maybe fix those properties and maybe bring about those properties in a deep network, we can actually make them see better. Okay, so that's the second study to tell you about. I think I should not spend too much time in this. Let me give you only a gist of this next study. And here, I'm going to give you an example of a different kind of experiment. So far I've shown you an example of a human experiment where we made people categorize faces. I've also shown you an example of like a computational experiment where we queried some deep networks. But I'm now going to show you an example of an animal experiment that we've done. Okay, the animal experiment is like this. We train an animal. There's a monkey in our case. We train it to actually sit in front of a screen and do a task. While it's doing the task, we actually record from the brain. So basically we are inserting an electrode. This is just a picture of how it works. We are inserting an electrode into a particular part of the brain which we know is important for recognition. So if humans have a damage in that part of the brain, it's called the temporal lobe. If you have damage in that part of the brain, you cannot recognize objects. You will be very deficient in recognizing objects. Okay? Your vision will be okay, but your recognition will be gone. Similarly, those people who have face blindness have damage in that part of the brain. So fusiform gyrus, lateral occipital complex, those are the regions which are involved. Yeah.
There are the chances of improving those.
There are actually, because the brain is known to have a lot of plasticity. So if you're damaged in the brain because of any kind of reason, if the damage is in some of the more complex parts of the brain, usually that function can be recovered over the course of like some accident or any event happens, the function usually recovers. The functional recovery is very bad usually if the damage is in the primary sensory regions. So for example, primary visual cortex, where the information comes from the eyes to the back of the brain, if that part is damaged, there's no recovery because nobody can take over that function. Similarly, motor cortex, if somebody has a stroke and that hand is not able to move, it's because the primary motor cortex, which is the output to your hand, the output is gone. But the person is able to imagine actions and plan actions and all that, but they can't execute them. But otherwise, if the higher order areas are damaged, usually there's a recovery of function. Okay, so what we're doing in this experiment is we're putting an electrode into the brain. We're trying to understand the activity at the level of single neurons. So on a good day of recording, you'll get a nice signal like this. These are actually action potentials produced by single neurons. That means that neuron is producing an action potential whenever there's a signal that exceeds its threshold. And this is actually now a signal processing problem, basically. So we are recording the signal from the brain. We got the signal, now we want to understand what's inside the signal. We want to filter the signal. So for example, we'll filter the signal using low pass filters, high pass filters to get the spikes and local field potentials, lots of signal processing at that level. Okay. Now we get the signal, and what I want to show you is how the signal looks like. So what I'm going to do is actually show you a recreation of an experiment that we've done in our lab at ISC, where the animal saw what you're going to see now. You're going to see what the animal saw. And then just for looking at those images, the animal gets a juice reward. In your case, you won't get any juice reward. Maybe you'll get something after, I don't know. Or maybe you already got your juice reward because of you got NASA. And what the animal is going to do is just look. He's not doing a task. And what you're going to hear over the speakers here is the activity of a single neuron, like this, converted into an action potential. This is one of the most beautiful things that you'll see as a neuroscientist, because you're literally listening to the brain activity live. It's going on and you're listening to the brain activity, and you can see what that feels like. So those brr, brr sounds are actually those blips, those action potentials that are being produced by the neuron. Okay, it's a single neuron, and they've converted the activity into audio. So what I hope you saw there is that you saw different views of the image, and you might have noticed that whether you saw something at this view or the oblique view, profile view or oblique view, the response of the neuron is the same. And actually it is because of these neurons, or neurons like this in your brain, that you're able to recognize an object even if you rotate it or you see it from a different viewpoint, a different position and so on. These are actually invariant neurons. They respond to the same object, even if the object is at a different appearance, different location in the visual field and so on. Okay? What you also probably notice is that this neuron responds to animals. Many animals evoke the response, didn't respond to the fish as much and so on. So there's some patterns to it. Exactly why these neurons respond to that particular image is a puzzle. We don't know. By and large, we don't know the answer. People are building models of those neurons to see how they work. What we wanted to understand in this particular study is what is it that makes our brain so good at recognizing distorted letters. And actually, I would even say to you that if somebody does not even know how to read, and you just give them a cheat sheet, and you ask them to match the distorted letter on the website with something that they saw on the paper, even they'll be able to do it. In fact, what I'll show you is that I can record the brain activity from a monkey brain and solve captchas. These captchas meaning the distorted letters that you see on the website. So even the monkey brain is able to do the task, and computers are not able to do the task. Okay, so that's how sort of serious the problem is. But if you think for a second, how is it that we are so good at recognizing distorted letters when we've never seen letters before, and letters don't occur in our environment? We created them, right? So how come we are so good at recognizing distorted letters? What I would say is that if you have neurons like this, which respond the same way across different views of an object, when you rotate an object in the viewpoint in 3D, what happens is that some features are getting occluded, some features are getting compressed, some features are getting expanded. It's a non-linear transformation that is happening of the image. Okay, and that non-linear transformation is a distortion. What I would say is that we are able to anyway recognize real objects when they rotate and when they are undergoing some distortion. And so those distortions that real objects undergo when you rotate them are probably exactly the distortion that we can tolerate when we look at letters and when they are getting distorted and so on. So there's probably a link between those two. And the precise link has not been worked out, but I think we're already good at recognizing distortions. So one more distortion is not so hard, basically. Okay? Yeah.
It's primarily because machines, like you said, they focus on local objects.
Yeah.
So let's
Could
say
be.
take a picture of them out there. Let's say choose the photo and send the same photo.
Yeah.
The machine will take some time to process.
Correct.
Whereas we are looking at the global.
So the problem is, so I agree with you. The problem is that we don't know, when you say global, we don't know what does it mean to actually capture the global gist of an object. Because there's some particular shape that you're capturing. We don't know exactly what that is. We've done some experiments to try and figure it out. But normally when you take an object, it has global structure as well as local features. And the local features are probably easy to figure out But the global features are actually something that we do just instinctively. Those are the hard part. And that's what I think probably makes our vision so good. Okay, so I will probably take 1 or 2 minutes and kind of wrap up there. So what we've basically done in the study is to record from neurons in the brain when you show them distorted letters and not distorted letters. And many of these things, the way you ask the question is very, very important, because that gives you some kind of answer which is more interesting or less interesting. So in our case, what we said is, suppose I showed 2 strings, right? 2 strings of letters, and I show the same 2 strings in 2 possible distortions. So that's what I showed over here. The string 1 shown in distortion 1, distortion 2. Imagine the distortion as some kind of twisting or bending or some kind of distortion. Okay? But I'm doing the same distortion to 2 strings. And the question I wanted to ask is, how do the neurons respond? Do they actually separate the string information and the distortion information, which is what I would expect if you want a good system to recognize the string and ignore the distortion? Or are they actually mixing the distortion and string memory? So basically that's the 2 questions. Either the neurons in the brain are creating a separated response, which means that they have a unique response to the string and a unique response to the distortion of the string. So the other kind of question I can ask is, how are the strings being put together? Is the response to the whole string a linear combination of the individual letters, or it's not a linear combination of the individual letters? So that's the question we asked. And because time is short, I'm just going to tell you sort of what we get. Basically what we find is that the response to distorted letters, we find, is a product but not the sum of shape tuning and distortion tuning. Basically the brain seems to separate the shape and the distortion from the shape. Okay, it's sort of separating style from substance. The second part of it is, the response to multiple letters is a linear combination of the response to single letters, but it's not the product of the response to single letters. So what we are seeing here is that in one case you get the sum and not the product. The other case you get a product and not the sum. So there's a very unique kind of rule that your brain is using to combine shape with distortion and also shapes with shapes. Okay, so that's what we find. And basically we asked in the rest of the study whether these 2 rules are sufficient to actually crack captchas. And basically the answer is yes. And again, I'm going to kind of skip a bunch of things to show you that. But you can refer to some of our papers, approach me if you don't understand exactly what's going on. But basically these 2, and we find that the same rules are actually emerging in deep networks which are trained for text recognition. So that's sort of the basic idea here. And let me just just skip through the rest of it and tell you that we're trying to reconstruct brain activity. We're trying to reconstruct images from brain activity, and that's sort of again ongoing work. And stop there and tell you that hopefully 2 take-home messages from this talk. One is, AI is still far from human performance, especially on tasks that we do without thinking. So whatever you do without thinking is still safe from AI. You're not going to get replaced by AI anytime soon, right? And the second thing is, a 2-way dialogue is actually possible. It's possible to investigate the brain and also AI together. And so we can use one to understand the other, use one to understand the other. Hopefully that gives us some better and deeper understanding. So let me stop there and thank all the people in our lab and thank all the funding agencies. Please do get in touch if you are interested in this topic or want to explore this further, and stop it.